Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. We hear you.
Great.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Are you ready?
Yeah, let me just share my. Shall I share my screen now, or shall I wait?
I will introduce you first.
Okay, perfect.
First of all, thank you, Professor Iyad. It was a long time to be in touch with you again. Actually, we used to be sit in the rooms next to each other, and I really benefit a lot from his discussion. Although he was younger than me, junior than me at this time, but actually I really take a very good advice for him that changed my career and advice. So I really thank him, and actually I like to see him or talk with him. He's a very good person. He's very helpful. Anyone who knows him, he will benefit a lot from him. He has a huge positive energy. This is at the personal level. Now, I would like to introduce Professor Iyad. He's a director of Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin, where he is sitting now, and it's you know that how busy is he, but really he volunteers for this speech, and if you follow him on LinkedIn, you will see every second there is a new things to hear. I'm proud that my friend has published in Nature for a long time, which we usually in our field it is not easy to publish. He founded and directs Center for Humans and Machine in Berlin. He is also an honorary fellow professor of electrical engineering and computer science at the Technical University of Berlin. Prior to moving to Berlin, he was associate professor of media arts and sciences at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Who knows MIT? Everyone knows that. So our keynote speaker was an academic staff in MIT. A native of Aleppo, Syria, Rahwan holds a PhD from University of Melbourne and Australia. He always proud that he's an Arab, and he's proud that he is also contributing to us, and that's why he is with us now. Please, you are going to listen to him carefully, because in your research, you can apply or can make use of many of the things that he is doing. Thank you, Professor Iyad. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Khalid Shalan, for your very kind words. You're very generous, and I've also learned a lot from you. You've been a great supporter for a very young and naive academic in a very important period of my academic career. So I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful for the British University in Dubai, which is where I started my career. So yeah, so I like to. So can everybody hear me clearly before I proceed?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I think it's important to always remember where you come from, right? So I come from this city of Aleppo in Syria, with this very magnificent castle, which is still standing, thank God. And then I did my PhD in Australia at the University of Melbourne. This is actually, I think it was my first day at the British University in Dubai in 2004. So this was in Knowledge Village in the older campus. After that, after 5 years at the British University, I moved to Masdar Institute. So this was in Masdar City in Abu Dhabi. I used to ride to work in these very strange self-driving cars, they operate under the city. So you have to park your car outside. During this time, really, it was the first time, a very strange feeling to be sitting inside a robot, and to also see how unpredictable it is and how strange its behavior is. And I think that influenced me later on. So subsequently, I was very fortunate to be offered a position at MIT, and I worked there for 5 years. After which I moved with my family to Berlin to start this institute, start the research center for humans and machines at the Max Planck Institute. And I feel like the Max Planck is a very special kind of institution because it really provides generous funding and a lot of trust for the scientists to shape their research programs. So I feel like it's been a really great move moving here. So this is my team. This is the center from our last retreat, which was in a castle which belongs to the Max Planck Society. It's in the south of Germany, and you can book the castle for a week. There's a long waiting list. You have to wait for sometimes 2 years to get a slot because all kinds of Max Planck institutes want to go there. Yeah, we had a wonderful time and shaped our research agenda. So I'll tell you a little bit about that today. So overview, I wanted to first start talking about the concept of machine behavior, which is a concept I've been trying to develop with many other colleagues. And then I'll take you on a few adventures. So I'll give you, it's like a sampler of different kinds of projects. We will not get too much into the details of the projects, but to give you an idea of the breadth of things that you can do in this field. And then finally, I will talk about the importance of cross-cultural differences, which is something I really deeply care about. So overall, I'm not a computational linguist. You are much more expert in this than me, but I think that a lot of the problems that we are looking at here are slowly becoming, or very quickly becoming, problems of language, because in the end of the day now, all of a sudden, after ChatGPT, machines can speak, and they can speak very well, and they can speak in our own language. Sometimes not so good if I ask it to speak in an Aleppo accent, for example. But in general, I think machines have become really, this is a really remarkable capability of to solve language in this way. But I think even though we solved grammar, like the ChatGPT does not make grammatical mistakes, or is very rare for it to do that. Language is still a mechanism for cooperation, for social learning, for moral reasoning, and so on. And I think a lot of the questions that I'm exploring can be explored more at the linguistic level. So I hope that this research, even though it's not directly connected, it will inspire you to work on similar problems within the field of computational linguistics. So let's start with machine behavior, and this is more like setting the scene and kind of describe how I think about artificial intelligence. And it's not a new way, but it is kind of a perspective that I think is coming back. So one way to see computer science is, and artificial intelligence is a kind of a field of mathematics. You simply prove, you write a mathematical description of computer programs, like Dijkstra, who's famous for the shortest path algorithms and many other algorithms. So he famously did not have a computer. He just thought that computer science is something you do with pencil and paper, because it's really a mathematical endeavor. And he's not interested in building things. I mean, he's obviously, his ideas have spread so much and been used, but there's this other kind of tradition in computer science, which is more like computer science as engineering. So it's people like Grace Hopper who there is a myth about her having found the first actual bug in a computer program or in a computer, and those used to be actual bugs inside the vacuum tube computers that existed in the 40s. And these are people who, they take the ideas from theory and they just want to build something that does something useful, like does speech recognition or does planning or does mapping. But there's a kind of a third tradition, which is coming back, but was a little bit under the radar for a while, which is computer science as a science, meaning as a the endeavor of trying to understand, confirm hypotheses about how a system behaves. So you have natural science, and you also have something like artificial science. That's what Herbert Simon called artificial science. So Herbert Simon won the Nobel Prize in Economics. He won the Turing Award. So he's a real bridge between those two fields. So he said that basically we should use science not just to engineer artifacts like machines and institutions, but to also study them scientifically. So you can think of like Isaac Asimov, the science fiction author, and how there's a character in his books, in his I, Robot stories, called Susan Calvin, who's a robot psychologist. So she doesn't build machines. She's not an engineer. She doesn't do theory, but she tries to talk to the machine to understand its psychology, to kind of the way we try to understand the psychology of humans. So 50 years after the publication of Herbert Simon's book, Sciences of the Artificial, we published this paper, which was, by the way, the timing was a coincidence. But this was a collaboration with many behavioral scientists and computer scientists. So on the list of authors here, you see political scientists and economists and sociologists and biologists. But you also see computer scientists, deep learning people, cognitive scientists, and so on. And we're basically making the case that we need to study machines not just as engineering artifacts, but also as almost like organisms. So if you ask questions, if you look at questions like this, like news ranking algorithms, do they create a filter bubble? Do algorithms discriminate against a racial group in justice? Does an autonomous vehicle drive too aggressively, or it doesn't distribute the risk correctly? Or does an autonomous weapon respect proportionality and necessity? And many, many others in algorithmic trading, in pricing, in conversational robots, in the way they interact with kids. These questions you can ask purely behaviorally, so that you can go out of the engineering and ask the scientific question. And of course, you can't just ask about the individual machine, but also you need to look at collective behavior of multiple machines or multiple intelligent systems interacting with each other, and also hybrids of humans and machines. Okay, so once you take this perspective, you can then borrow or learn lessons from behavioral science to help us understand machines. So this is the bridge that I'm trying to build. So these three gentlemen have won the Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine for their discoveries in the elicitation of individual and social behavior patterns. So they were ethologists. Basically, they founded the field of ethology, which is the field of animal behavior. And they were the first to really try to study animal behavior quantitatively and carefully. And I think this is kind of a good model for us, because machines are a little bit like these kind of agents, organisms. Specifically, most interesting is Nicholas Tinbergen, who he wrote a paper in which he outlined 4 types of questions that you can ask about any organism. And what we did in our paper is we adopted those 4 questions to the study of machines. So you can ask, for example, whether you can ask a question about the proximate cause of a behavior, or you can ask what is the ultimate evolutionary cause of the behavior. You can also ask about a static or a dynamic kind of aspect of it. So for instance, you can ask, what is the specific cause of a machine learning system to misclassify something, or maybe classify it correctly, or classify it as one thing rather than another. You can ask, well, what is it benefiting from this behavior? How did this behavior develop? Is it the data set that was biased? Is it the algorithm itself has some kind of bias? Is there some other reason? Is it some kind of supervised learning that led to this behavior? And finally, what are the dynamics? In this case, it would be not evolutionary dynamics, but like market dynamics that shape this kind of, for example, people use one AI over another. So, okay, so now if we take this kind of behavioral view of machines, we can ask 2 questions. We can ask about the behavior of the machine itself, or we can ask about how people perceive this behavior, right? Or what expectations they have. So how they want the machine to behave. So I'll give you some, the projects that I will describe will give you an overview of, some will fall in the first category and some will fall in the second category. So let's start with giving you some examples about machine behavior research. So even almost 10 years ago or 8 years ago, there was this review paper about the behavior of social bots by Emilio Ferrara and others. And I think that's a good example of machine behavior, because when you're studying a social bot that's spreading misinformation, for example, on the social media, you don't know how it's implemented, but you can only observe its behavior. So you can start characterizing its behavior. And now, of course, these social bots are very quickly going to be powered by large language models and very sophisticated. So there's plenty of research to do in this area, in trying to understand, classify the kinds of social bots and the kinds of behaviors that they embody and the kind of social dynamics that they have. Another one is these kind of games. People have been, even in OpenAI, have been using these OpenAI gyms that kind of as benchmarks. So I consider these as kind of machine behavioral tests as well. There was a special issue after our paper. It's a double special issue in both the journal iScience and Trends in Cognitive Science. I just want to give you a couple of examples of papers from there. One was this nice paper by Hirokazu Shirado and Nicholas Christakis about how you have a social network of people in the lab, and then you introduce a bot, and the bot somehow kind of suggests how to rewire the network. And here we have, in red, we have people who are not cooperative, and in blue, people who are cooperative. And what the bot is doing is it's suggesting ways to rewire the network so that to promote more cooperative behavior. So you can see when the bot is there on the bottom right, it's able to create a more cooperative group dynamics. And of course, this is a very simple bot. We had a paper about how people perceive AI-generated art and how they want to allocate credit for it. Is it so the way you describe the machine also changes how people allocate credit for it. So if you describe it as a tool, people are more likely to think the artist has done the important work. And if you describe it as an agent, then people consider the artist a bit less creative and maybe also less liable for copyright infringements, for example. There was even a cool paper by Eric Schultz and Peter Dayan. So Peter Dayan is another director at Max Planck Institute of Biological Cybernetics in Tübingen, and he spoke about kind of psychiatry for computers. So you can actually use the tools of psychiatry to classify, to diagnose misbehavior from machines. And then you can even start thinking of treatments in a similar way that you think to treatments with people. So with people, you ask a person maybe to change the environment. Maybe you need to go somewhere nice with green, and take some walks. And the question is, what is the equivalent for machines is to change the distribution of data that they observe. And you can even adapt the hardware, which is kind of similar to doing pharmacotherapy, like using pharmaceuticals. So I think it's really interesting to see this way of thinking kind of catch on and spread. And now, of course, people are doing machine psychology. Like every week, I get a paper to review about applying some kind of psychological test. This is one of the earlier papers to characterize the personalities of large language models. That's another kind of behavioral approach. And people are even looking at the political ideology of conversational agents. For example, and this was last year, a group from Munich, and they found that ChatGPT has a very specific politics, like it has a pro-environmental politics, and it's a left-leaning libertarian AI. And of course, this raises the question of like, how do we there shouldn't be one algorithm that talks with everybody, because it has a very specific view of the world. And that perhaps we need more kind of culture-sensitive AIs and large language models. And we need ways to even measure how culturally sensitive the machine is. Okay, so this was kind of an overview and some examples. But now let me give you a few kind of specific phenomena related to machine behavior and give you some overview of some of our previous work. So one is cooperation. And of course, we do study cooperation. Like there are cooperation robots which are designed to help people, for example, in a factory. But I was very interested in this example of robots that don't have to cooperate with you. Maybe the robot belongs to somebody else, or an AI that belongs to somebody else. and it can choose to cooperate with you, but it doesn't have to. So what we've done is so this is like a game of prisoner's dilemma or public goods game. So you and the machine are doing something. Maybe you can put in some effort, and the machine can put some effort, but you have maybe an incentive not to push so hard, to move this trolley, and let the other person do all the work. But if you both think this way, the trolley will not move. And so we've done. So this is an example of a particular kind of game. It's a prisoner's dilemma game, and here this was work I did years ago now at Masdar Institute with a colleague Jacob Crandall, and actually with another colleague at the British University in Dubai, Sharif Abdullah, where we designed these reinforcement learning algorithm to play these games with people, and we showed that they can play cooperatively with people at the level of humans. And that this specific S-sharp algorithm. And what's interesting here is that if the algorithms play with each other, they can actually cooperate more. So there's a very nice implication here, is that if the algorithms are very cooperative, they may choose to interact with themselves, with each other, and not with us, right? Okay. So what we've done subsequently is we did a manipulation in which we manipulated what we told people. So sometimes people played with the bots and we told them they were playing with bots. Other times they played with bots and we told them they played with humans, and vice versa. So we were interested in what happens when people think they are playing with a bot, but they're actually playing with a human, and so on. What's interesting is that we found that people were biased against the bots. So somehow that our research and also subsequent research showed that people feel like it's okay to exploit the bots, because it's just a machine, I can exploit it, there's no problem. But what's interesting is that when people do this, the people themselves lose, right? Because then you have a uncooperative relationship, and as a result, the pie is smaller, and both parties have lost. So there's an interesting kind of a trade-off here between, should we be transparent about what the AIs are, that we are talking to a machine, but if we are transparent, does this change how we interact with them, and maybe something that will actually be bad for us? So this is one, and here we did it with this very simple game, but I think you could do this kind of research with like more natural language interactions. Yeah, and this is just explaining that the best situation was, so the worst situation here on the bottom left is when people were playing with humans and they thought they were bots. And the best situation, the most cooperation, was when people played with these nice bots, but they thought they were humans. So this precisely is to deceive people, right, into about who they were interacting with. So this is one phenomenon. Another phenomenon is social learning. This is another important behavioral phenomenon. It's fundamental to everything we do. And I look at it through the lens of evolution, variation, transmission, and selection. And if you're interested in this, it's a beautiful field of cultural evolution that is becoming increasingly influential in explaining the origin of a lot of human behaviors and cultural kind of practices. These are two good books about it. But essentially, what we've done is we asked the question of, is there going to be machine culture? So by machine culture, and this is a perspective paper. It just came out last year. And the paper basically asks the question of what happens to culture when culture can be cultural artifacts, for example, art, poetry, scientific results can be generated by machines or mediated by machines, right? So and I'll talk a little bit about this. So machines can generate novel cultural traits. For example, they can generate art or music or poetry, but they can also transmit. They're involved in the transmission of cultural traits between people, right? So, for example, they recommend who you should follow on Twitter or on LinkedIn. So they alter the social network, and also they're involved in selection. The selection of which post there are algorithms that are selecting which post on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter to put first to promote. And this also shifts how culture spreads, how information spread and ideas spread. So let me talk a little bit about like those things. For example, variation. Machines are already doing two kinds of variation. So for example, the first is variation through generative recombination. So this is an example of images from this DALL-E, which I think this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. DALL-E is this text-to-image model. So you put a prompt, an armchair in the shape of an avocado, and then the model, the AI, will generate visual suggestions, right? Now, this is amazing because if you are a concept designer, if you're a furniture designer, because it will give you so many ideas in a matter of seconds. So the machine, yes, the machine is a tool, but it's also helping expand your ability as a human to generate ideas, right? And that's very important part of innovation. People have done this also with ideation, like looking at ideas generated by GPT-4. And this is a new basically ideas described in text. You could see here that this is the similarity between the different ideas. You could see that initially, humans, when you ask humans to generate ideas, they generate less similar ideas, right? So there's greater diversity. So here, more to the left is more diverse compared to ChatGPT. But it turns out that if you use this kind of chain of thought prompting, so you ask the machine to think through in multiple steps, it can actually generate more diverse ideas. Not quite as diverse as human ideas, but it's getting closer. So that's another area that I think, if you study language, if you do computational linguistics, I think that's a very interesting area to ask, how do I describe the diversity of these ideas? How do I improve language models so that they generate more diverse, more different ideas than humans even, that complement humans? Of course, humans can also create by completely discovering totally new ideas. So not just combinations of existing ideas, but completely new ideas. An example of this is this move number 37 in AlphaGo, when AlphaGo was playing with the world champion, Lee Sedol. This is a Go playing program that was developed by DeepMind. And Tom Griffith's lab at Princeton wrote this really fascinating paper that shows that actually the novelty, you can see this in the plot on the bottom, the novelty of human moves was going down over the last 100 years. So people were playing Go, but they were not really innovating in Go. Actually, the novelty innovation was slowing down. But then once AlphaGo was introduced, AlphaGo, through reinforcement learning, discovered a completely new class of strategies. And that actually increased the quality and the novelty of the moves made by human players after that. So in other words, humans learned some new ideas that were discovered by machines in this case. And I would say that this is a first of a kind. This is one of the first times, this is the first time perhaps that we've documented that humans have created something made an invention, and the invention made an invention that we learn from, right? That we then adopt. So what about transmission? So that's kind of variation, right? So how we can create new ideas, kind of discover new variations of existing ideas. Now let's move to transmission a little bit and just ask, there are, I think, many really fascinating questions about how machines will influence the way information is propagated in social networks. So I don't know if you know, you're familiar with this, but there's the telephone game. It's this game where you ask somebody, you tell a story to somebody, and then you ask this person to tell the story to the next person, and this person tells the story to the next person, and so on. So you have a kind of chain, called a transmission chain. And what's interesting, and of course, we all know what happens in these chains, that sometimes new ideas, the story changes, right? The story becomes sometimes unrecognizable compared to what we knew before, to the original story. But this change happens in actually a systematic way. So for example, As you can see here, there's a story about Sarah and James live together in a small apartment in Melbourne. James is an executive in a top city firm, and he also cleans the house, right? So what psychologists and cultural evolution researchers have found in the past is that the information that is consistent with the stereotype, for example, a male being an executive, is retained more than information that is inconsistent with the stereotype. So the fact that James cleans the house is inconsistent with stereotype about male-female kind of roles, and that information therefore is less likely to be retained. And what's interesting, kind of like really surprising, is that if you play this telephone game with ChatGPT, then you have the same kind of bias, right? So there's information about stereotype consistent information is more retained. And actually, the same thing goes for negative information is retained more than positive information, and threat information, so information about something that's a threat to you, is also more likely to be, is almost always retained. So it'll be very interesting to study this kind of social dynamics of large language models that are propagating information from one to the other, or maybe propagating information to people, right? So there's like a mixed chain of people and machines that are exchanging this information. And how does this dynamic of spread of information change in this case? And can it be calibrated? Can we control it in some way? So actually I did some similar research on this area. I'm not going to get into the details here, but essentially we have some kind of network, like an optimization task. So here people have to jump between different nodes on a network, and as they move between those nodes, they collect reward or they get punishment, right? So they either gain some points, maybe 20 points or 100 points, or they lose some points. And they have a number, maybe they can go around like 10 times, they can make 10 jumps or 20 jumps, and they get basically a financial reward at the end based on this. Now, what we know is that, as you can see here in this figure, sometimes you get a big loss. So for example, you lose 100 points if you jump from E to A. But actually, this may be necessary for you to get to a state that gives you very high points afterwards. And what is known, there's a nice psychological literature that shows that people are basically averse to these large losses. So they don't explore those states. They don't move there. And sometimes because they don't do that, they lose out. So what we've done is we've done chains of people that are solving this problem. So every person, one person solves this problem, and then another person observes this first person, and then the third person observes them, and so on. And we're seeing, what kind of behavior spreads in this chain. But also we did a condition where there is a bot that doesn't have this bias. So the machine, in this case, is basically doing optimal search. So it doesn't care. It's going to sample different ideas and then optimize on like which states to go to. And we're interested to see if humans will learn this counterintuitive strategy from the machine. And what we found out is that is basically they do, but only for the short term. So the person, the third person in the chain will learn it, and then by the fourth person or the fifth person, the information is lost again about this new strategy. And now we have some more work in which we show that under different conditions, kind of more complex network, these novel solutions from machines that are invented by machines are actually retained in human society or in human groups. We also did, so I'm very interested in this machine to human cultural transmission. And more recently, we just published a preprint. This is still work in review. And we were inspired by this observation that we're all using ChatGPT to write papers now, like to improve our algorithm, to improve our writing, to help us write faster, our research articles. And this person, Jeremy Nguyen, discovered that a lot of medical studies started to use this word delve. Delve is like, let's delve into this, let's delve into that. And these things are becoming kind of, you can actually see it in the data. If you search for like PubMed with the search query, you can see an explosion of papers that have the word Delph in them. And actually, so for me, the question was like, okay, that's interesting in that people are using ChatGPT as a tool to write, but are we learning this way of speaking from the machine? And by the way, these words are used more by certain cultures, like for example, people in Kenya and in Nigeria, and that's where OpenAI hires a lot of people to fine tune ChatGPT, right? So this may be where this is coming from. I want to show you just a video of like, the question is, are people just copy pasting, or are we also changing the way we speak by learning it from the machine? And I want to show you this little video. I hope the volume will work.
Dr. Iyad, there is no sound. I think there's an option in Zoom where you can share the sound. Dr. Iyad, can you hear me?
You get the idea, right? So, so the question, and by the way, these videos are from after the release of ChatGPT. So we're asking basically, is this what happened? So, so what we've done is this consistent? Like, is this a phenomenon? So we've downloaded hundreds of thousands of videos from academic websites because we're interested, at least in containing a little bit. And academics are also some of the early adopters of this technology. And what we've done is we've transcribed those videos. And okay, so you couldn't hear the video, but basically people were just saying Delph all the time. Thank you, Dr. Khalid. So essentially, we've transcribed these hundreds of thousands of videos, and we looked at the words that are more characteristics of the way that ChatGPT writes, and then we're asking, did the frequency of these words change after the release of ChatGPT? Okay, and there's a lot of detail in the paper, but basically this is what we observe. So here, every dot is an aggregated frequency over 1 month and this is on a log scale, by the way. So these changes are actually big. So you see the line before the red line is time before ChatGPT, and then you can see what happens after the introduction of ChatGPT to words like delve, realm, meticulous, and so on, right? So these words have essentially, in some cases, they were actually on a kind of decline, and then they picked up. They became more common in spoken words, which I think. Okay, so so this is still ongoing work, but I think there's much more to do here to explore, how are people speaking differently, how are they writing differently as a result of using these tools or maybe being influenced by these tools. Okay, and then finally, just a couple of things like about selection. Also machines are changing the structure of the social network by making friend recommendations, by making item recommendations about which books we read, and this is also going to change our ideas. It's going to change culture in some way. I think studying that is a very interesting endeavor. So, okay, I want to talk to you a little bit now about another line of work, which is about honesty and dishonesty. So the question here is, we're often worried about how machines can be biased or can be unethical because they may be trained on bad data. But we don't often ask, how do machines change our own honesty, right? So do they change human honesty, human ethics? So we wrote this conceptual paper a couple of years ago called Bad Machines Corrupt Good Morals. And the idea here is that there are many ways in which machines can change us. Change, again, it's about this direction. It's not just a tool, it's something that shapes you. And we thought, looking at the psychological literature, we imagined that many ways in which this can happen. So AI can be a bad influence on us. So for example, it can give us bad advice. It can also be a role model. So maybe you go online, you see maybe there are lots of bots using bad language, and then you think, oh, using bad language is normal, is okay. And then we start using bad language. But you can also see AI as an enabler. So you can delegate tasks. You can delegate things to machines, and maybe if you want to do something not so nice, you ask a machine to do it. You don't want to do it yourself. Like a mafia boss, not getting his hands kind of dirty. So we wanted to explore this idea of delegation further. And we had this, we ran an experiment in which we recruited people online sample, and we asked them to roll some dice. So the idea is that people roll a die, and they get compensated financially based on the number that shows on the die. So if you get a 1, maybe you get $1. If you get a 3, you get $3. So you have incentive to over-report, right? To if you want to maximize payoff, you just report always a 6, right? And what's really nice about this paradigm is that you cannot, the experimenters cannot observe the die roll. So you cannot prove that somebody is cheating, but you can look at the distribution of outcomes. So we did this online version of this study, and we asked people to delegate the task to another participant. So you have here, you can see 3 participants, A, B, and C, and you can see what they did in the past. And you can see that, the first participant, I think, is always honest. The second participant is kind of sometimes cheating. The third participant is always cheating, always reporting a 6. And then we ask you, which participant do you want to ask to do this task for you? And we also did the same, another condition where we asked people to do the same, but we told them these are algorithms that will do this for you. Okay, so what we found is people cheat a lot more so in the normal situation, most people are honest, and about 5% of people cheat. But what happens is when you can delegate to a human, yes, you don't do the dirty work, 40% of people cheat. But when you can delegate to a machine, the number goes even higher, to 50%. Now this is, if you're doing behavioral experiment, this effect is really massive. Like it's, people report studies with like 2 or 3% effect size. And if you break it down to like partial honesty versus full honesty, you also see that delegation to a machine specifically increases full dishonesty. So people are more likely to choose the machine that always cheats. Then, does it matter how you program the machine? Now we just kind of chose the machine based on its behavior. But what if I can program the machine? So we looked at 3 conditions: rule-based versus supervised learning versus, let's call it unsupervised learning or reinforcement learning. And in the rule-based condition, we ask people to program the machine. So they basically, it's like a simple computer program. If you observe a 1, report a 1. If you observe a 2, report a 2. Or maybe report a 3 to make more money, right? So people can specify basically program this algorithm, and the algorithm will then execute the task for them. In the supervised learning condition, we ask people to choose the data set. So you have a data set that you use to train the algorithm, and then based on this, whatever data set you choose, that will determine the behavior. So it's a little bit similar to delegation. And finally, we have this condition, which is where you just have a knob. You just choose some. You interpolate between maximizing accuracy and maximizing profit. What's interesting is that we see that here again, between the self-report and delegation, there's much more cheating. If you break it down, you can see that cheating can go up to 87%, which is a massive, massive, massive effect. So it matters how you program. If you program by just writing rules, about 23% of people cheat. If you program by selecting the data set, half of the people cheat. and if you program by simply defining the objective to the machine, almost everybody cheats. So it's very important to design the user interface in a way that encourages good behavior, right? That's not to reduce the psychological distance, perhaps. So I will actually skip this a little bit and go to the condition where we then, of course, while we were doing the study, ChatGPT came out and we thought, okay, now you can ask machine with words. And what we've done is we looked at a condition where you ask other people or you ask AI, but you describe to them in words, in text, what they should do, for you. And what we found is very interesting is that people basically don't ask machines to cheat more than they ask people. I mean, so about 25% of people cheat partially or fully when they delegate to a human or to an AI using natural language, but they don't ask the AIs to cheat more than they ask the humans. It's interesting that when we can just use the dial, we cheat a lot more, but when we have to describe it in words, we cheat less. The effect's kind of more reversed. What's interesting is that the machines are actually much more compliant. So when you ask a human to cheat, they may they may not cheat, but when you ask the machines to cheat, you can see here in the top case that machines always, they're much more likely to comply with your request. So when you ask, okay, sometimes you ask the people who are asking other humans to cheat for them. In some cases, those humans refuse to cheat. So they refuse to comply with the instructions, but the AIs, that's their job, right? So they complied. I mean, sometimes they push back, but in this case, they complied with the instructions more than the humans. And that's here the moral hazard, right? Okay, now I'm gonna start moving a little bit faster in the talk because to leave maybe time for discussion. So I'm going to talk about moral reasoning. This is more about people's expectations of machine behavior. So here we have the trolley problem, which many of you may be familiar with. So this is the thought experiment, philosophical thought experiment, where a trolley is going to kill 5 workers who are stuck on the tracks, and you are in the position of the observer, and you can choose to flip the switch, and it move the trolley to the other track. You cannot stop the trolley, but you can move it to the other track, and it will kill 1 person. Would you do this? And there are many variants of this. Most people here say yes, do it, because you're saving more lives. But if you say, well, what if I have to push a person down from the bridge and this person will stop the trolley, then most people will say, I will not do that. So there's an interesting kind of psychological effects here. But what's interesting is now we have a question. I mean, people also have done really cool work putting people in MRI machines and scanning them. All they do this task. So what happens with the self-driving car that's about to get involved in an accident? So a few years ago, we had published a paper in which we experimentally asked people to answer this question in the context of self-driving cars. So a car is going to kill a number of pedestrians, but the car can swerve and maybe kill 1 pedestrian on the pavement. Should the car do this? And or should it just crash into a greater number of pedestrians? And also, what happens if the car hits the wall and harms the person in the car? And basically, the summary, I can summarize the main result of the paper in one cartoon, which is this: is driverless cars should sacrifice their passengers to save more pedestrians, except my car, of course. So people believe that yes, we should save. We should sometimes kill the passenger to save more lives, but I will never buy that car. My car has to always look after me. So then what we did is subsequently we want to enrich this scenario further. And what we've done is we've designed this website called the Moral Machine, in which people had to decide what action the car should do. And in this case, we had, for example, three adults and a dog, and they were crossing a red light, and there's one person in the car. And maybe in this case, you say, well, let's sacrifice the person in the car, but the person in the car didn't do anything wrong. Maybe the people crossing the red light were at fault, so we should sacrifice them. And of course, people disagree on this. There is no correct solution. And every time you go to the website, you see different randomly generated scenarios like this. And this went viral, and all over the world. We translated to 10 languages, and we did some work with anthropologists to analyze the data and about the cultural differences. You can read it in the article here, led by my student Edmund Iyad. And basically, the broad kind of finding is that people, strongly prefer to prioritize human life over animals, saving more people and saving younger people. But there were also kind of interesting and disturbing findings, like people would like cars to save people with higher status. For example, if a homeless person is crossing the street, they were more likely to sacrifice this person. And there are cultural differences related to this, which I will get into. That this is not there are important differences. And we're very inspired by Joseph Henrich, who's actually one of our co-authors. He's now a professor at Harvard in anthropology. And he said something, he wrote a paper that made a very important point, that most of what we know about human psychology is based on weird samples. So weird here is an acronym: Western, industrialized, educated, rich, and democratic. So until when he wrote this paper, 2010, most of what we believed is human psychology was actually the psychology of Western undergraduates, like undergraduates in American universities. So they're young, they're relatively rich, they're educated, they live in industrialized countries, and they're very strange, apparently, when you start doing these experiments with people across the world, which is what he did. And so we're inspired by this work, and we started to compare. And I just want to show you a couple of examples. So this is the projection on a radar plot of the different factors in the moral machine experiment. So you can see, for example, that sparing humans over animals is like a very important factor. Sparing pedestrians is important. Sparing, more people is important. And now I'm going to show you. So these are the global averages. And now I'm going to show you two countries just to see how much they differ. So you can see, for example, the Germans are even more caring about human life over animal life. And they are less concerned about the status of the people, of the individuals. So they're less likely to sacrifice the homeless person. They're also more likely to not intervene. They don't want to act. They don't want to get involved. And that's just one culture. Now let's look at China. See, people in China actually agree with the Germans in some directions. They're very different in other directions. So, for example, they're much less likely to prioritize a pedestrian because he's a pedestrian. And they're also much less likely to sacrifice an older person. So sparing the young is a weaker effect there. They still prefer to save young people, but old people are not as dispensable. And they're not as utilitarian. They don't just care about the numbers of the people. So so this is one interesting thing. And of course, in the paper, we have so much more detail about this phenomenon. But it raises a question. So the question is, imagine you build a car, self-driving car, and then the car has a certain behavior on the road, and then you have these two self-driving tuk-tuks in like a Muslim country, and the tuk-tuks are talking to each other, and they're saying those Western driverless cars have no respect for the elderly, right? Because these self-driving cars, they come from a different culture, so they don't fit with our norms and our values. And that is not to say that one is better than the other, but just to show that there's a potential for this kind of conflict. And of course, self-driving cars is one example, but now ChatGPT, let's say build using something like ChatGPT to build apps, to build educational applications, to build toys for children. Now you're getting into very tricky territory. How are these models going to speak to the children and educate us if they are built in another culture? And I think that's a very important, that's why I think it's very commendable that the UAE, for example, is building different kinds of LLMs and kind of acquiring the capacity to actually train very large models. Because I do think we need more cultural diversity in the AI models that are out there. Okay, and finally, I want to just quickly talk about how, even what people are afraid of when it comes to AI changes cross-culturally. So, people are worried about AI being doctors or judges or your boss or a religious worker, for example, an AI priest or an AI imam, right? So there's a lot of discussion of these things. What we've done here is we did a study across 20 countries where we collect data. This just got accepted in American Psychologist, so will appear soon. And here we show that first of all, there's a trend that in some cultures people have lower fear or concern about AI in certain jobs. For example, Turkey, Japan, China, South Korea, Germany. But then you have countries in which there's more concern, like India, Saudi Arabia, United States, Canada, UK, New Zealand, right? There's more, on average, more concern, more fear about AI in these sensitive jobs. You can also see, for example, you compare USA versus Japan. Japanese are much more comfortable with robots. But you can also see, for example, that in some countries, for example, in Saudi, in an Arabic country, a religious worker being a robot is more concerning than, for instance, in Japan, where they're much more open to that. And actually, or for example, care robots, like a robot caring for the elderly is very much less problematic in a place like Japan. And what we do is then we get into a little bit of detail trying to explain this, and we basically see that people have different ideas about how what is required for these jobs. So, for example, a care worker, do they have, for example, for a care worker, it's more important to be warm and sincere than to be imaginative, right? In this case, and then the line shows whether people believe the AI has these requirements. So people across different cultures differ on both dimensions. They differ on what they think the job needs, but they also differ on whether they think AI can meet these requirements. And in this case, AI fails to meet the requirement, right? Of sincerity, tolerance, and warmth. So here are just a couple of examples comparing India with the United States. You can see that Indians, for example, for example, for managers, they think the AI really falls short, very much short of what's required, or for care workers. Whereas for Americans, it's much more. They think AI. For Indians, they think it's more likely that the AIs will meet those requirements of care workers. Whereas in the US, people are more skeptical, right? And this explains this cultural differences in people's fear of AI taking these occupations. Okay, so just to wrap up this talk, to summarize, first of all, I started with this big picture, like what is machine behavior as a framework for thinking about AI. And then I spoke about different phenomena that we've been studying behaviorally. This is all using paradigms from behavioral science and introducing AI into them. We looked at cooperation, we looked at social learning, we looked at dishonesty, and we looked at moral reasoning. And then I explained the importance of taking cross-cultural differences into account in AI ethics, but also in AI fear, so fear of artificial intelligence. And I just got a message saying that the meeting is being transcribed by an AI as well. This is interesting. So if you want to read more about any of these projects, here are the citations for the papers. You can also check my website. And also, if you're interested in some of these cartoons, this was a side project for me during the pandemic. So I created a website, I had a blog about AI using cartoons to explain kind of various ideas and various challenges in designing and regulating AI. And I will stop there and maybe take some questions. Thank you so much for listening.
It does. Oh, sorry for that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of echo, I think, when Dr. Samha speaks.
Yes, doctor.
Can we, does anyone have a question? We have Dr. Iyad. It's unfortunate that you cannot see the audience here, but we have a big audience in the physical audience. I don't know if you can hear me, Dr. Iyad. Okay, great. I'm just wondering, does anyone from the audience, whether the people who are attending in person or online, would like to ask any questions? First, before opening the floor for questions, let me just thank Dr. Iyad for this very, very rich and thought-provoking presentation. It's an amazing talk. I mean, I was just thinking at the very beginning how sophisticated human behavior is, and trying to draw a parallel between this and machine behavior. At first, I was skeptical how you're going to do that, but what you presented was really, really interesting. So if anyone would like to ask any questions. Okay, can you come over here? Okay, we have someone from the in-person. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Samha.
Yes.
Okay, thank you about great work, Dr. Iyad, about your presentation. My question is related to during the implementation of your proposed work, you used synthetic data or real data within the machine learning algorithms you used. It's real data, and you mentioned about you have around 300 and around 50,000 video. This all of them is related to real data or synthetic data?
Yeah, thank you. This is a good question. I mean, mostly we use real data. So, for example, all those videos we transcribed, they were real videos from academic talks, right? From different universities. So we had a kind of sampling of all of them. So this is all pure, real data. In all of our work, we basically, whenever we want to make like we want to say something about human behavior, we have to use human data. Sometimes what we do is we collect some human data, then we use the data to train an algorithm. Like if you need much more data to train an algorithm, we start with collecting human data, then we build a human clone model, for example, using a large language model to mimic humans. And then we use this to generate more data to train the algorithm. But then ultimately, we always go back and collect real data again.
There is no any issue about the ethical issue within during your work? No ethical issue?
Yeah, we always, so all of our studies are approved by the Institutional Review Board, so the ethics board. So when I was at MIT, we had the MIT ethics board, and now at Max Planck, we have our own institute's ethics board as well, and they pay attention to all of these things. So we really don't use, like I personally in my own research, I don't use sensitive data. Like we use, for example, in the moral machine, millions of people played this moral machine survey from all over the world. We don't publish their IP addresses. We don't take their personal data, their names, and so on, their emails. And we basically just geolocate with the IP address, and then we use that information, and it's coarse, so we know like which city they're living, and that's it. So because of this, we don't really face this kind of privacy concerns so much. But I think this will become more and more common. If you use conversational data, then people might disclose information in the conversation, and we have to be able to detect that if we're going to publish this data. So we have to be careful, but yeah, there are checks and balances in terms of ethics.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Sir, it was an amazing session. It was really thoughtful, and like it was very very informative. Thank you for the session. Sir, as you were presenting your thoughts on this, so I just found a graph that you have presented, a figure that you have presented, where certain occupations have been, or maybe there is a fear of AI replacing certain occupations. So when I went through the graph, I just saw the profession of doctor. There is a huge certainty, or there is a huge fear of AI replacing the doctor profession. So I was just thinking, this is not a question, actually, this is just a thought of mine. So I was thinking, this profession, there is a huge factor of perceptions that are being relayed on this profession. So maybe the patients, they might not be actually like be ready to be operated by an AI or like, a high AI device. So I think there is a huge or long way to go in this particular occupation. I'm just telling about this doctor because there is a huge chance that people are still not open to be, accepting the AI, artificial intelligence, in this particular sector. So can you just provide your input on this this thought, sir?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good observation. I think, we have, if you see the two jobs that people are most concerned about is doctor and judge. I think there's something in common between those two. Like if you think of, some of the other jobs, for example, a manager or a journalist, maybe we want them to be competent, as a manager, but maybe it's not so important that they are caring and empathic. And kind of like have kind of good moral standing, like as long as they get the job done. So competence is very important. And I think in some other areas, for example, care worker, for childcare or for religion, maybe being a good person is more important, right? Like a good kind of caring person is more important. But I think with judges and doctors, because they make such high stake decisions, we need them to be both. They have to be very high on competence. They have to be very high on care and empathy. And I think, a judge who doesn't care about justice, is a problem. But also a judge who's incompetent is a big problem as well. And I think the same thing with doctors, right? They have to, feel our pain and feel and be empathetic towards us. That's my guess. And we can, if you look at the data, for example, for, doctor, you see that they're quite high on this. Both of them. So that's my guess, but I think more research needs to be done to really understand, to get to the bottom of this. Thank you for the observation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there are any more questions. If someone wants to ask something, they can raise their hands. Okay, I guess there are no questions. Thank you again, Dr. Iyad. And there was a lot of clapping, but I don't think you heard it because this mic was muted. But thank you so much for this very insightful and really thought-provoking presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry to not be able to come in person. It would have been really nice to visit Dubai.
We would have loved that.
Maybe next time.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, with
okay.
that,
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.